This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
And then as we were wrapping up the interview, she looks at me, and it's sort of the smile creeps on her face, and she says, "You know, you would make a good chaplain." And I was like, "No, I don't believe in God." And her response to that was in sort of the most perfect Zen response. She goes, "Well, neither do I. The question is, what do you believe in?"
This is the Heart of Hospice podcast with Helen Bauer. Today I'm talking with Chaplain Devin Sean Moss, host of the Adventures of Memento Mori podcast. Whether you're a family caregiver or an end-of-life professional, the Heart of Hospice podcast is here to enhance your hospice experience by connecting you with information you can use about end-of-life care.
The sponsor for this week's episode is Barbara Carnes Books, featuring the work of award-winning hospice RN educator Barbara Carnes. BK Books is proud to offer the End-of-Life Guidelines series, a compilation of 5 essential education booklets designed to support those caring for terminally ill loved ones. Visit bkbooks.com today to order the End-of-Life Guidelines series to support your journey of compassionate caregiving. This episode is sponsored by Odonata Care, creators of the Hospice Care Plan. Hospice agencies and end-of-life doulas are now using the Hospice Care Plan booklet to support their patients and caregivers. It's become a trusted resource in the end-of-life community, helping to educate and equip caregivers. Visit thehospicecareplan.com today to purchase the Hospice Care Plan booklet.
So I've got a very unique guest today that I'm really excited about. My guest today is Devin Sean Moss, otherwise known as D.S. Moss or Devin. He is a chaplain and a humanist or a nontheist. He's also the creator of the Adventures of Memento Mori podcast. Devin will tell you that he is unwavering in his pursuit to relate stories that connect us to our humanity. He's a natural explorer. He likes to use playful inquisition to examine the complexity of the human condition and the meaning of life. Devin will tell you he is uncertain of what happens after we die, and he has dedicated his life to the positive changes that can happen while we're still alive. This is a unique conversation. It's unusual, and it was really wonderful. Devin has a pretty unusual, I won't say crazy, but he has a really unique story that's really interesting. So he's a chaplain, and he's going to tell you the story of how he became a chaplain, and how his friend's simple comment that he would make a great chaplain led him to do the work that he's doing today. We're going to be talking about the work of chaplains and all the myths and misconceptions that surround that discipline. Devin says he's learned how to bring prayer into his engagement with families and patients in ways that serve them within their belief system and actually take nothing from who he is and what he believes. He also shares how stubbing your toe, as he calls it, and making mistakes is how he's learned to be a better chaplain. The New York Times published an article about Devin and his journey with death row inmate Phillip Hancock, and Devin tells about his work with Phil and how it changed him. You can find Devin at mystartingpoint.life, read more about his work, and watch for the upcoming release of his podcast series on his experience with Phil Hancock. So that's mystartingpoint.life. So here we go, on to the show. So here's my conversation with Devin Moss. Devin, welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's so great to talk with you. I want to ask you a question just to get the conversation started. It's not a question I sent you in advance, so my apologies.
I like this already.
Yeah, the fact that you like it so much makes me a little nervous, but we'll just see how it goes. Other than your own podcast, right, you had The Adventures of Memento Mori. What podcast do you like to listen to?
That is a good question. You know, someone last night asked me for a reference, and it's probably not what you're expecting at all. But one of my favorite podcasts that I love to promote whenever possible is The Ballad of Billy Balls.
The Ballad of I'm so scared to ask what that's about.
No. It's a true crime-esque. It's the second season of Crime Town, so it's part of the Crime Town podcast feed, and it's probably now 5 years old. But the reason why I recommend it, one is because it just really captures New York in a way that I think is nice sonically. And it's sort of a sitting at the edge of your chair type of listen, just from a story writing perspective. And then the sound design is spectacular as well. And I am a person that leans really heavily into a well-crafted audible story. I know in sort of podcast land now that's a lot of conversation podcasts, and those are great, but I also love when I'm taking on a story with a person. So I would highly recommend The Ballad of Billy Balls. And then traditionally, like I'm also like an old school Radio Lab type of guy. Yeah, so I'll stop there. I'll just be rattling off the titles.
No, I get what you're saying. I think I listen to a very eclectic mix of podcasts, and some of it depends on how I'm feeling. You know, I'll listen to a little bit of news to capture that, but I also listen to a show called White Lies, which is by NPR, and it's a storytelling type thing as well, but it's historical mysteries or things that were cold case type issues, and these investigators go out and start digging up witnesses and revisiting, and it's the same sort of format in the storytelling. I think that's very appealing.
Yeah.
Not everything I listen to has to do with death and dying.
Exactly. I always have to index that with people too. It's like I do have other interests.
Yes, I do listen to other things. Well, so we are in the business of death and dying. That's part of what we do. You working as a chaplain, but you sort of had a surprise entry into chaplaincy. And I've heard your story, but tell my listeners, how did you even find yourself working as a chaplain?
Well, I mean, it is a direct line from podcasting. It's maybe a winding path, but there is a connection nonetheless. I was probably year 3 in The Adventures of Memento Mori. And one of the questions that I would get asked the most, just out in the world at cocktail parties or whatever, once I became known as like the death guy, it was interesting to see what people wanted to talk about. And I will sort of pause that part of the story and say, in my experience, I don't find that people think death is taboo. I just feel that people don't know exactly how to start the conversation. So that's what I've learned over my experience. So anyway, the question I would get all the time is, what do you think happens after? What do you think happens when we die? And I always found that to be a fascinating question. It's a very understandable question. Of course, it's a very natural question. But out of all the things that our impermanence, our mortality may teach us, that it's what happens next is where people sort of, in my experience, talk about or like think about death the most. And so I was like, well, let me do some episodes on it. Let's explore that topic. And so I did this mini series within the greater story of Adventures of Memento Mori to do exploration, I guess I'll say, into religious beliefs in the afterlife. And it's called The Myths of Immortality, where I sort of took 6 religions that are maybe the most common, one being an outlier in there, which was Voodoo, but just to see commonalities and to see what these religions, believed as it pertained to what happens next. And it was just a random circumstance that led me to a chaplain to talk about the Buddhist beliefs in the afterlife. And so, again, a serendipitous way that I even found her as a guest. I drove upstate. I live in New York City. I drove upstate outside of this town called Phoenicia, where the Zen Mountain Monastery is, to interview this Zen master named Trudy Hirsch Abramson. Jinpu is her Buddhist name. And, we started talking about Buddhism a little bit, but she was a person that as soon as I met, I felt like I had known for my entire life, right? Like there was the vibe was there, the laughs were there, the understanding each other's humor and space, like everything was like just a known thing. And so we chatted and chatted. It was supposed to be, as you know, you sort of schedule these things for an hour. You try to keep it to 30 to 45 minutes because that means more editing in the back end. But Trudy and I were just chit-chatting for hours. And the red record button was still going. And, what we talked about Buddhist beliefs in the afterlife a little, but she started talking about her work as a chaplain, as a Buddhist chaplain. And she worked at Sloan Kettering in New York, several New York hospitals, and was just telling these incredible stories about her experiences and about people as they transition in these hospital settings. And then as we were wrapping up the interview, she looks at me and a sort of a smile creeps on her face and she says, you would make a good chaplain. And I was like, no, I don't believe in God. I mean, I grew up religious, but lost faith early in adulthood. And her response to that was in sort of the most perfect Zen response. She goes, well, neither do I. The question is, what do you believe in? 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, I don't know. And then she's like, well, why don't you just sit with that and let it stew? And, we had such a connection, and I do have great respect for religious leaders, particularly Zen Buddhists. And so I sat and I stewed. And yada, yada, next thing I know, I'm sending off on my graduate school application to become a chaplain.
I love this story. I've heard you tell this story before because I've watched your Inval talk and I've listened to your podcast. Your story, this comment she makes, you should be a chaplain or you would make a great chaplain. I think so many people who work in spiritual counseling and chaplaincy across the different healthcare silos have heard that. You would be a great hospice nurse or social worker. You would be great with end-of-life patients. And I'm sure that 95% of us look at these people and think, you're out of your skull.
Out of your skull.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. It's horrible. It's depressing. It's sad. Why would you do this? All these goodbyes day after day.
Yeah.
And yet.
Here we are.
Seminary. Yeah. It's an awesome story. Awesome.
So, seminary as a non-theist.
Yes.
I mean,
like you didn't burst into flames when you walked in the door or anything like that.
No. It was, to be fair, it was a UU graduate program, Unitarian Universalists. So they're very, very loving and accepting.
Yeah, very open-minded.
Yeah.
So really your circumstances, what you bring to your work is sort of the embodiment of one of the biggest misunderstandings about hospice chaplains or chaplains in general and the work that they do with patients at end of life, is that a chaplain's religious beliefs are manifested in the care that they provide to the person and their caregivers or loved ones. That's the biggest misconception people have about chaplains. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And you do see it. You do see it. But, when I went to my first unit at CPE, Clinical Pastoral Education at Bellevue Hospital during the pandemic, I was very spiritually insecure. Right? My cohort, there was a Carmelite monk, there was a Catholic priest, there was a Baptist, there was a Nazarene, there was an imam, and my supervisor was a rabbi. And so here I am, in this cohort, being like, I don't believe in God. What am I doing exactly? And I think what was helpful in that was that I had to come to a really clear understanding what spirituality was to me. But then, I really want to thank my supervisor, Rabbi Molly, because she would really push this too, was like, understand that you not having sort of all of the religion coming in with you into the room with the patient is actually a superpower, because you have to then make it about the patient, and you have to understand what's sacred to them, and you have to then get into their boat, as sort of the metaphor that we would always use in CPE. And so that, after you kind of, like anything, after you get a little practice and you get a little familiarity with scenarios, but the thing about being a chaplain too, you're never there's always going to be a new scenario.
Oh yeah, it's different every day.
Different every day. For me, it was actually a blessing. I'm just sort of thinking through if that's the right way to phrase it, but not having the religion manifest in the room with the patient served the patient better in terms of spiritual care.
Yeah. The interventions that you were providing weren't really through the lens of your own personal religious beliefs. And really, that's the way it should be, right? We're supposed to come to the care of a patient, regardless of what the discipline, whatever discipline we work inside is. But we're supposed to come without our bias and without our own labels and our perceptions of who these patients are and what they should or should not believe or what's appropriate, or an agenda, which is another thing that end-of-life workers struggle with. When you come in with an agenda for fixing, converting, proselytizing, saving, redeeming, all these words that are just really should be completely taboo for what we do, because it's not about our agendas at all, other than to provide good care and meet the needs of the patient.
100% agree with that. 100%. And also I would add is that there is a danger with very religious chaplains that maybe pray at bedside that make the process of healing attached to the conviction of your religion, meaning like you're still sick, and that could be because you're just not praying hard enough, right?
Ooh.
Which happened in my cohort. It's like we need to pray more to get you better, and that is not in any stretch of the imagination what spiritual care is.
Right. That if your faith were stronger or your prayers were different or better or to the right person, you would find healing, you would find comfort.
Yeah. So, and any attachment to your health or why you're there to the scale of your conviction, those should never be connected.
Right. The fact that you are dying is somehow connected to you falling short.
Exactly.
Spiritually.
Exactly.
So what kind of reactions did you get from patients and families when they found out that you were not attached to a specific religion, that you were a humanist, non-theist? Did you have people that pushed back on that?
Surprisingly, no. I mean, and surprisingly, it didn't come up all that often. And like, listen, if they're a devout Catholic, and there are many rites and rituals that the Catholic religion has in those circumstances, you refer out. And
Sure.
the same goes with if they are of Muslim faith or whatever, right? We have other chaplains there that we can refer out in those circumstances. But I would say 9 times out of 10, or probably 9.8 times out of 10, my faith was never even a topic. It was about them. And so the part was me getting comfortable with when I was asked to pray with the family or with the patient, is just to have a sincere power, so to speak, outside of us in that room that I could invoke in that moment. And after a few runs of things being awkward, I kind of landed on it, and it felt right to me. And there hardly was any pushback from the patients. And again, like, I think what I also learned is that when folks are in acute moments of crisis, they try to make sense of things.
Right.
And more likely than not, the big why in the room, why is this happening to me? Why is this happening to my family? Why is this happening to my children? Is framed in the context of theology, mythology, or symbolism in some way. And so so the spiritual care is trying to understand how they're interpreting their pain and suffering. And so what I believe, supernatural or not, is not particularly relevant. It's about how they're viewing this moment and helping them try to find ...
Right.
But I also never went in, and this is true for working with Phil in the prison to like outside sources. I never walked in the room and said, "I'm your humanist chaplain and I don't believe in God." I was like, "I'm Chaplain Devin. How can I help you?"
Right. Just neutral. Just an introduction. Yeah.
And I, and I don't think it's lying by omission at all. I think I let them start how they want the relationship to go. And if it comes up, I don't hide it, but I don't start with it.
Right. It was never meant to be deceitful.
Yeah.
This conversation is so good, but we're going to take a quick break. Hang on for more great content.
The sponsor for this week's episode is Barbara Carnes Books, featuring the work of award-winning hospice RN educator Barbara Carnes. BK Books is proud to offer the End of Life Guidelines series, a compilation of 5 essential education booklets designed to support those caring for terminally ill loved ones. At the heart of this bundle is Gone From My Sight, affectionately known as the Hospice Blue Book, a timeless resource that has touched over 40 million lives. This bundle is more than just information. It's a lifeline for families navigating the difficult stages of the dying process, offering guidance for the last months, weeks, days, and hours. Trusted by end-of-life workers nationwide, the booklets provide direction for managing symptoms, explain the dying process, address pain medication use, and offer suggestions for moving forward with grief. The End of Life Guidelines series bundle from Barbara Carnes equips you with knowledge and tools to provide the best possible care. The bundle helps hospice agencies better educate patients and families, providing easy-to-understand guidance that can improve scores on their CAHPS satisfaction surveys. It's the ultimate caregiver's companion. Use it as part of your care plan today. Visit bkbooks.com today to order the End of Life Guideline series to support your journey of compassionate caregiving.
So, Devin, I want to touch on something. I want to talk about Phil because your experience with him is really, really important. It's a big story. But I want to touch back on something that you said that I think is really important for my listeners, is we have a lot of hospice end-of-life workers that listen to the podcast. You said something about praying with patients.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So what does that look like if you are a non-theist, a humanist, and you have a patient that's a Christian who asks you to read something that they consider a sacred reading from the Bible, or you're asked to pray? How do you provide that care? How do you reconcile that and provide that intervention? Because I think the perception is, if I am Buddhist, I cannot pray with a patient who is Christian. Or if I am a Christian, I don't have anything to share other than proselytizing with a patient who is Wiccan or non-theist. So how do you reconcile that? And what do you think that give and take looks like between you and what's happening?
Yeah, I will start by saying most chaplain units consider themselves interfaith. There's not the scale of chaplain bodies to be a one-to-one, this is my religion, I only serve those that have the exact same religion than I. No one would get spiritual care in that instance. So again, it's always indexed on the patient and the patient's needs. And so in a sincere way, you have to, as a chaplain that you are serving someone that is of different faith, you have to, one, get in their boat, find the bridges for commonality, and make it about them while still being strong-footed in your beliefs. You're not just swaying in the room and going with the wind and just trying to make everybody happy. That's not what I'm saying. Is that sometimes it is work. And if it's too much work, then you can refer out to the appropriate chaplain that may do better. But to give you a specific example about praying, I think where I would land, and I was super nervous about praying at the beginning. I offered meditations. I had a back pocket full of dad jokes that I'd be like, "Hey, you want a joke?"
Were you just trying to get, anything in front of the prayer stuff so you could avoid it?
Yeah, it's like we can do a meditation, a joke, or a prayer. Right? That's
There's another option, but we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah, but then I came to quite like it, and I found my sweet spot. So I would invoke the power of the divine that connects us all. And I would invite us. I invite the power of the divine that connects us all into this space right now. And what's also important that I learned about praying in that setting is that it is a tool to bring attention into an intention. So particularly if there were family members in the room as well, like what we're trying to do is get everybody's frequency and vibrations on the same plane, right? And I think and a lot of times it lowers anxiety quite a bit. It gets people to breathe a lot. It helps to relieve all of it. It gets below the psychic level. Praying does. It's an amazing tool for that. So it is a way for attention to direct to intention. And then, before you pray, you always ask, so Helen, what are we praying for today? And it's always, not always, but most of the time, it's health, family, and peace.
Yeah.
You would be amazed about, and usually in that order, whether it's the patient themselves or the family of the patient. That is what we do. And so, one of the sort of the practical things that I learned early on in chaplaincy is you have to make sure you know the names of everybody in the room, because you don't start a prayer without actually having a clear understanding who these people are and the relationships and what their name is. Because I think even saying their names within that is a source of getting that sort of that below the psychic level into, how I understand spirit to be. Because to me, spirit is what grounds us in our humanity, and it's also what grounds us to each other. It is the connecting force that some people say heart space. I believe in an embodied experience, so I don't sort of segment into like parts of the body that does certain things. But that is how I see spirit, right? It's a connecting force. It's a connecting consciousness. And so that's what prayer does in a room of multiple people. And, that's why you should always know people's names. And then you essentially just repeat back in your own words what the patient or the family had asked for you to pray about. And just the act of repeating, just the act of demonstrating that you're listening to what's on their mind and doing it in a way that, they do see you as a type of clergy authority. So it also it makes it real in a way that might not have otherwise been as real. So it's such a powerful grounding exercise. And to wrap this up, to answer the question, it doesn't really matter in that sense if I'm a Buddhist and they're a Christian. Again, so long as you are sincere in what you're saying. And my experience, and it's maybe true for all chaplains, is chaplains that are non-Christian, is you have to figure out the wording. I would avoid saying amen for the longest time, because again, I was raised Christian, and so I'm very familiar with the word. But in this game of feeling authentic, I would say dumb stuff like "Let it be so," and that was just like sound like I was in a Star Trek episode,
I like it. I like it.
And then you open your eyes and you realize that they don't know that you're done, right? And so then. And so
you need something to close it. Goodbye, something.
You need amen is a powerful word to let everybody in the room know that I am done speaking.
Yeah, it's become more of a universal term, I think, as far as we're done. Devin, did you ever feel like you gave anything of yourself away or compromised anything about who you were when you provided interventions for someone who had a faith, spirituality different from yours?
I tried not to. I can't think of an instance where I did, but it is unlike anything else that I've experienced in my life. My original degree is in film, and so when I went to a film set, there were some transferable skills. There was zero transferable skills from my graduate degree in theology to being doing rounds at Bellevue Hospital during a pandemic, right? So it is learning by stubbing toes. And so I won't say that I didn't compromise myself in some way, but you got to feel you can only learn in these scenarios by stubbing your toes, by like, that, and that's what's great about CPE too, is that, we have this process called a verbatim for those that aren't familiar. And so we repeat back in our cohort, like in our studies, in our classroom setting, we repeat back. It's essentially you're writing a script of what happened. And then your supervisor and your other colleagues will say what you could have done differently, where the missed opportunities were. And so kind of the point of CPE in general is just to figure out where you may be compromising or could have done things better. And so my answer is yes. I don't recall specific stories, but certainly I did. And as a chaplain, you'll never get far if you don't, right? You're always trying to learn and figure out. And as we said earlier, every scenario is different. And what works in one scenario may, not work in another.
Yeah. And it's true for hospice nursing too. You can do all the book learning you need to, everything you need to get your degree, but you really learn about interacting and how to provide quality care for patients and their caregivers, their families, by doing it and making mistakes. Because you can't do it without making mistakes. And I don't know, there's something very concrete and foundational about stubbing your toe repeatedly in different scenarios. So I think that's very important. It's part of the learning process. And because even every caregiver is different inside a family, what's comforting for somebody is going to be offensive for somebody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we're in a constant learning cycle, I think, in end-of-life care. I don't think you can get around it. We're going to break for just a minute. This isn't the end of the episode. There's more to come, so stay connected.
If you're a hospice caregiver looking for resources to enhance your care, look no further than the Hospice Care Plan, A Plan to Comfort. Available in both English or Spanish, this invaluable resource is designed to support caregivers in providing the best possible care for their loved ones. The Hospice Care Plan from Odonata Care now has integrated QR codes in each section of the booklet. Readers simply scan the code with a smartphone, and a free playlist of videos provides practical tips for caregiving and symptom management. It's like having a personalized guide at your fingertips. Caregivers will find 150 videos offering expert advice and practical guidance to navigate every aspect of caregiving. Hospice agencies and end-of-life doulas are now using the Hospice Care Plan booklet to support their patients and caregivers. It's become a trusted resource in the end-of-life community, helping to educate and equip caregivers. Visit thehospicecareplan.com today to purchase the Hospice Care Plan booklet. Empower yourself and the ones you care for with the Hospice Care Plan, A Plan to Comfort. That's thehospicecareplan.com.
I want to talk about your big story, your challenging story, the one that you spoke about at Endwell. You had a very unique opportunity as a chaplain to work with a gentleman who was on death row.
Mm-hmm.
So, sort of in a nutshell, it's I'm sure it's a big story, but tell my listeners about that experience.
Yeah, I will start by reframing the way it was presented in the New York Times article, or at least the title of it. I am a humanist chaplain. I prefer the word non-theist. I never in any circumstance introduce myself as an atheist chaplain, but it makes a sexy headline.
Yeah, it's splashy.
Yeah. It's provocative. And I will say that Phillip Dean Hancock was also an atheist by definition. And I guess it's true, our non-belief is what brought us together, but it wasn't the indexing point of our relationship. And so I just finished with Bellevue or thereabout and was trying to figure out what my next steps were. Because this is like chaplain is hard enough, but a non-theist chaplain, there's no ladder, right? There's no next steps. And so you have to figure all this stuff out on your own. And so I was figuring it out and just happened to get an email from the American Humanist Association, my endorsing body, asking if there was anybody out there that would be up for being spiritual care provider for this man on death row who was scheduled to be executed at the time in May. And so this was December. And so I said, yes, I am up for it. And so met with his attorneys, met with Phil. It was a good match. And right around that time, his execution was then postponed from May until November. So Our relationship began in earnest in February of 2023. And I worked with him as a spiritual care advisor until the execution, which was the November 30th. It was primarily over phone calls. We would talk almost every day for 20 minutes was the time that the securest phone conversation would last was 20 minutes. And then in October, I actually sort of picked up my suitcase and went to Oklahoma City so that I could do my Friday visits with him for the last 2 months. And there was like the clemency hearing and a bunch of other sort of team Phil stuff that was just made much more sense that I was, in Oklahoma. And so, boy, I learned so much about myself and about Phil and about the importance of spiritual care, particularly for two people that don't believe in this case, particularly a Christian God. And so what was interesting about the relationship with Phil is being able to wrestle with the topic. Because, we were similar in that I was raised Pentecostal. He was raised Methodist, but Methodist in Oklahoma, which is almost Pentecostal, right? I mean, you can't go far. Like, religion is part of everything in Oklahoma, right?
Right.
And so to express doubt was looked down upon.
Oh, yes.
And from my experience with Christianity and my study of what Jesus taught is like doubt is an important part of one's religious journey. Anyway, that's beside the point. Other than we got to wrestle with it, and Phil was very familiar with Scripture, and so he still, again, in these acute moments of crisis, he was trying to make sense of the world through theology, mythology, and symbolism. He just didn't. What he was trying to understand desperately is why not him? It just nothing that the Bible espoused applied to him. He never experienced any of that. And so that's where spiritual care is critically important, is for those that from the jump feel forsaken. And luckily, to some degree, that was a big part of my experience at Bellevue too. And is like, why, if this is a God that is benevolent and loves, why is this thing that's so torturous happening to me? I'm a good person. And so that's the hard part of chaplaincy, is helping people wrestle with those questions, the doubt. And so that was kind of the basis of our relationship leading up to, the death date that had been looming on the calendar for 20 years.
For 20 years, he sat on death row.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. And you were there on site during the execution, is that right?
That's correct. I was in the execution chamber with him.
I mean, that's an amazing story, an amazing experience for you to have. How did that change you?
It's a good question. I think it's continually changing me. I do. I mean, I will say that. I guess let me start with a week prior, which a week before they're put on what they call death watch, and death watch is just a new term for suicide watch. And so they take the incarcerated person out of the cell that they'd been living in, which in Phil's case was home. He had nested. The mattress was the mattress that he had bought. It was the familiar place in which he had lived for years and years and years. And so they take him out of that familiar place. They put him into a new cell with nothing, and they keep the lights on 24 hours a day. And what was extra cruel about that was that a week prior to the execution date was Thanksgiving. So they took him out of his cell on Thanksgiving Day. So he missed his Thanksgiving visitation, because they all get a holiday visitation. So he missed his Thanksgiving visitation because he was in process. He missed his Thanksgiving meal. And the attorneys and the warden and, everybody that could have had any power in making that week better, or, he was in a legal fight till the end. It's a 4-day weekend. Yeah. You get Thursday, Friday off. Like, no one's working Thursday or Friday, Saturday or Sunday.
All gone. Yeah.
So four of his last 7 days, it was a vacation for the world. Outside of Sue, who was a very dear friend of his and a volunteer that would go visit, and me, right? We would make sure that he had someone there, or someone to talk to. And so, and the reason why I start with the week prior is because the way it changed me, and the thing that I struggle with the most, is not necessarily per se the execution itself. That's its own world and its own thing. It was just the countless missed opportunities for even the slightest display of humanity. And so it's not saying that, Phil's case is different, self-defense, and I'll sort of keep the legal aspect of this to the side. But it begs the question of who we are as humanity, and in particular for states that are as devout as Oklahoma claims to be. There is no demonstration. It is getting even is the word of the day. It's not displaying love and kindness. And if you did believe in what's next, if you were, be it Hindu, Buddhist, or Christian, that last week is an opportunity to demonstrate the love, to demonstrate that there's something better, so that if one soul carries on to the next life, we could hope that they were introduced to another way of being, right? A more loving way of being. That is what all scriptures and all religions espouse, what they believe to be true. And so it was a very, I get quite worked up about it, because it was just one after the other. And even like the night before, they messed up his last meal. Like Sue and I were, it was our last visit. It was a non-contact visit, so there was a plexiglass between us. And we were, for the direness of what that meeting was, we were a tight group, and so Phil would always try to lighten the mood, and so there was a lot of laughing. And he had been really looking forward to this Kentucky Fried Chicken original recipe, dark meat only bucket, right? And so, I think generally we think that last meals, people can order whatever they want, but there is a $25 limit, and it's got to be within 5 miles. So it's so you don't get many options. But he has to decide 30 days prior, right? So he's written it down 30 days before the execution, and those 30 days you're just sort of dreaming of this Kentucky Fried Chicken. And so in our last visit, a lot of it was just talking about, Kentucky Fried Chicken. And then come to find out, I was one of the last to learn about this. I didn't know about it till the next morning, is that instead of what he wanted, they got him a 10-piece chicken finger. And that may not sound like a lot or a big difference, but that's a big difference between a 10-piece chicken finger and a big bucket of original recipe dark meat, KFC. And it was dried out. And then the reason why they said they had to do that was because of the bones in the chicken. They could have said that when he originally wrote it down. Someone could have identified that 29 days prior to this, to at least give him the agency to have a choice in this. And, and some people argue he's a convicted murderer. You take what you get and you like it. But it goes back to this idea that at what point do we draw a line in the sand and say, this is our better version of humanity? And at this point, it is the most critical that we demonstrate what it is supposed to be like or what we aspire to, instead of, it's the opposite. It's like, how low can we go?
Yeah.
And so anyway, so that is kind of how it changed me. I'm very critical about systems at large, because it was also this very, I never quite could square if it was people intentionally being malicious, if it was just general incompetence, or people doing the absolute bare minimum in their jobs. Right? It was maddening about all the missed opportunities. And so that's kind of how it changed me, is that I really had to, surprisingly, it wasn't confronting a society that deems it justice that we kill our own citizens as punishment. Intellectually, I can have that conversation, and intellectually, I can understand that conversation being had, and I think it's a conversation definitely worth having. That's where I thought sort of my emotion would reside, but it's not. It is in these missed opportunities to demonstrate the best of us. And it's the hardest, it's the hardest thing for me to reconcile on the back end, right? Like, I'm a humanist. My religion is faith and humanity. And it was rocked. It's like, oh my God, am I just a silly little naive person? Because it was profoundly disheartening.
That's an incredible experience. Would you say you're better for having known him and walking that particular journey with him?
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, he was, as we all are, he was a complex human. There were more missed opportunities in his life than I've experienced, right? Missed opportunities for a demonstration of the better part of us. He suffered more as a child than I did. Yeah, however, I am definitely a better person, and my hope is that, in his final moments, that he actually sort of was able to feel the significance of that relationship through my eyes.
That's wonderful. So, Devin, let's lift up a little bit, because that's a pretty heavy story, heavy topic.
Sorry, everybody.
No, and we probably could talk for another hour about it, because there's so many nuances, and I would love to be able to have enough time to talk about being present at the execution. But I also understand that there's for lack of a better word, there's a sacred moment inside there, and we don't want to exploit or create any kind of theater around that moment. So I just want to leave it there, because that's a very profound experience as it is. And it's time for us to close anyway. But Devin, how are you taking care of yourself these days? What's your go-to? I don't even like the term self-care anymore because I think it's become so trendy, it's lost meaning. But how are you taking care of yourself these days?
Very soon after the execution, I have to subscribe to spiritual care associations, and they have a spiritual care tip of the day, and it's an email. Rarely do I might check it like once every 2 weeks. I have a folder that I just put them into. That someday in the future, it's like, the old New Yorkers that would just sort of stack up in your house you'd never read. And like, someday I'm going to read all of these. So that's what my spiritual care tips of the day. But one day I actually opened it, and it began with the Taoist description of life is a sequence of 100 joys and 100 sufferings. And it was very important for me to hear that, because I had my share of sufferings. And so it made me actively say, okay, now I'm going to give attention and priority as much as I can to finding joys, And so it's taking a little break from the space. It's still trying to figure out what I want to do. It's including more play in my life, right? Like game night, softball, these, I've forgotten how important play is to our human story and our human journey. And just continuing my meditation practice. I'm off to New Mexico after this. I'm currently in San Francisco, but next week I'm heading to New Mexico for 2 months just to learn how to ride a horse. So I'm just trying to live in the moment and reflect on what's happened and figure out next steps.
I like it. Well, I'm going to have link to your podcast in the show notes. And what's the next big thing for you, Devin? Where can people look for you?
Well, I am working on a podcast that follows my journey with Phil. So just subscribe. You can go to www.mystartingpoint.life. From there, you can peruse some courses I have available that help people plan for end of life, while also subscribing to a letter that lets you know when this season with Phil or my 12 episodes with Phil will come out, which will be end of summer. Wonderful.
Thank you so much for being on the show, for sharing this incredible story. I'm honored to have you.
Oh, thank you, Helen. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Be sure to catch the next episode of the Heart of Hospice podcast. You can find more episodes on theheartofhospice.com, and don't forget to follow on your favorite podcast platform. You can connect with the Heart of Hospice podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and send your questions or comments by email to helen@theheartofhospice.com. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.